Welcome Wargamers, Doug here from 2 Plus Tough, and I love it when a topic comes along that really gets my blood pumping. I've been in a little bit of a hobby slump lately, and so having this very refreshing, influx of new information and things to get excited about as far as the games that we love really got me stoked, and it came from the most unlikely of places. That is the 40K new edition announcements that they're coming forward with. There are some cool things coming, and so what I wanted to do in this video is talk about what's happening in 40K and what I'd like to see move over to Age of Sigmar. So let's talk about it. First up, and certainly the most relevant for the channel, is the new Dawn of Fire book series. Now, if you're not familiar, GW has released several 2 army starter sets lately for 40K, just like they do for AOS, as well as a series of rule supplements in a series called Psychic Awakening. And all of these have their own little narrative threads and directions, and the point of this book series, Dawn of Fire, is to have one unifying story arc that either ties them up or plays off them and continues their story. The big reveal for the 40K thing puts this as the biggest crossover between the team at Black Library and the actual writers who put lore in those smaller game or boxed sets. This is an absolutely stellar idea. Imagine this for Age of Sigmar, right? As someone who does lore, and I do whenever a new release or no lore book comes out, I do weeks of lore talking about what's going on in the story, and still in the comments I get I don't want to say bombarded because that makes it sound negative. It's not. It's a good thing. But people asking where do I get started? What are some good first books? It would be incredible to have a singular series that you could point people to that could pick up on some of these narrative threads that we've been seeing since, say, Malign Portents, Malign Sorcery, what is the other one? Forbidden Power or something like that. All these little box sets that have a continuation of the story arc, but now we can wrap them into one succinct series. And as someone who gets asked those kinds of questions a lot, this is a huge deal. And I'm going to start reading it, and I'm sure because I haven't read all the narrative beats for all of the things up to this point, I might get a little bit lost on some of the earlier stuff, but I will be able to get caught up on what's happening in the 40K universe. And that's okay. They don't need to have every answer for me, in one book. That would be super wordy and exposition heavy and that kind of stuff. Don't worry about it, but it gives me a chance, an entry point, an on-ramp onto what the company is doing now with their story. The fact that you can have products that are onboarding, meaning, those 2-player army sets are great for getting players to either join the game or expand to a new army, and then you can take those same narrative threads and say, and this is how they fit into everything else. It's a slam dunk. Now, when the preview show actually went down, I was dead asleep. I didn't feel like waking up because I knew it was just going to be about 40K. And then later in the day, as I was reading through the big reveal article, I saw this, and this is the point where I immediately got interested, and I was like, okay, what else y'all got? So they had me hooked like a magic carp in 98% of the oceans in Pokemon, but the best was yet to come because the real treat dropped, and that is, of course, the 40K app. I cannot overstate how important the Age of Sigmar app has been for getting players into the game. I've talked to many of them about what the barriers to getting into this hobby, and many of those barriers were conquered by the AOS app, and that simply is because for a lot of us, I can't carry a battle tome around with my job and that kind of stuff. The digital editions don't show up great on my phone. I don't own a tablet, but I want to be spending my time whenever I have it in the hobby. It's a little hobby boost just in your veins to get you to be talking about and learning about new things in the game. And so having that app where you can have the primer rules as well as the unit entries for every single unit in the game is a huge deal. It makes the game far more accessible to people as far as trying to understand, in terms of relative to the rest of the game, what this unit does and what's special about it, and that kind of stuff really makes for a great way to get new folks in. It's entirely about accessibility, and my assumption here is that it'll be a lot like the AOS one in terms of what it sets out to do, which is free unit rules, access to codexes, which is their term for battle tomes if you buy them, the primer rules with a list builder, subscription service, that kind of thing, and I think it would be perfect. 40K, for being their main, cash cow, is sorely behind the times when it comes to making miniature games approachable. We've talked about this when I was talking about Infinity or Wild West Exodus or even Age of Sigmar. All those things are far ahead of 40K when it comes to bringing in new players. Soon 40K will enter into that realm of games where you can literally walk into a game store and say, that looks cool. Pick it up, and then with a free app, you have all the rules for the units and the game and a mission, and like, yes, it's open play, but that still gives you a chance to experience what 40K is like on some level. Additionally, and this is a kind of a tacked on note, but it's a huge one, is that going forward with the new codexes, I almost said battle tomes, for 40K, when you buy a physical copy, you will get a digital copy as well, which is something that people have asked for a long time for, and I think that that's a smart move. Now, that may result in a slight price increase on codexes, knowing that now you're getting multiple versions of it. That's fine, I'm happy to pay it, but to be perfectly honest, I think that's a win too. Now, next up, they mentioned something called the Crusade system. This is a narrative format where troops start fresh and gain experience, and my assumption is leveling up over time with different skills and abilities and things like that. There's not a lot of information here about it, but in terms of like what they've talked about with 40K that gets me excited to play the game, this is the big one, right? I don't care about the rules and that kind of stuff as far as like, you know, tanks getting better, all that stuff. That's all tangential to me, but the fact that you can have a rewarding narrative experience as a campaign format with your friends is what I'm all about. And so I love 40K narrative games. I just had one this last week, but in terms of having them regularly, they're hard to come by, at least in my area. Having a more formal setup that's conducive to narrative games is really, I think, where it's at. You know, obviously we can all just say, oh, we're playing a narrative game, but that means different things to different people, whereas if you have a specific narrative campaign system that we can all lock into, we can have better games. One of the theories that I've seen floating around that it's going to be similar to the Warcry one. If you don't know, Warcry, basically, you have your warband roster and you personally keep track of how they evolve and change over the games. The only requirement from your opponent is that when you meet up to play a game, you say, hey, I'm going to play a narrative campaign game. Are you? Yes, cool. And we play a game. That's really what it is. But through that, your troops and stuff like that can level up and get better and new abilities as long as you and your opponent are both playing a campaign. You don't even have to be at the same point in your campaign, you're just playing a game together. I love that in AOS. But moving more specifically to stuff that I want to see in Age of Sigmar, tanks are back, they say. Now, what I mean for AOS, obviously we don't have tanks. We have steam tanks. It's about all we got. I want big monsters to dominate instead of hordes. And this is something I've mentioned before a few places, on a few streams, so in 40K, when tanks get swarmed, they can still shoot with all their guns at the swarm. Of course, in AOS, you can still shoot, so those things are one-to-one. Tanks are coming more into line with what Age of Sigmar is. But I'm more getting at the idea that like GW is acknowledging the big scary models aren't big and scary, right? That's the core idea I'm talking about. It's not about tanks and it's not about shooting in combat. It's about having your big scary things be big and scary. I'm not quite sure how to translate that into Age of Sigmar, like what additional things monsters need in AOS to make them big and scary and meaningful on the table in more ways. But the fact that it's on their mind, I think, is a really good indicator of the future. Make Cygors great again. Last one here is that in their preview, they had this little video show up, and it was, let me see here, the 9 things in the new edition. They specifically mentioned that they have loads of new game sizes balanced at every level, from small combat squads, which would be like a handful of models, to full battle zones, which is just shy of an apocalypse game, I'd imagine. Now, my working assumption here is that they're going to make like suggestions and rules on the size of the game table, the number of relative strengths in the units, how many wounds they can have. All this kinds of stuff already existed before. Smaller games, you know, you can't just bring like 5 tanks, that kind of thing. And my thought is just, why don't we have this already? Like, this is such a great thing. I don't have room for a 6x4. I know most folks in the UK don't. That's why they have gaming halls and clubs and that kind of stuff. So even having relatively balanced formats at smaller games is a big win. Right? Give me 40K on a 3x3. And I don't mean kill team. I don't really care for kill team. I want 40K on a 3x3. Side note, they did say kill team was there and it's still being supported, which is awesome for folks who do like that smaller combat skirmish level game. But this is just one more avenue for folks to get involved. And it puts a slow grow into 40K in the context of the bigger game to like onboard new people with a direction, different sized games that you can play. I think it's a win. It's just a win after win. So of all the things that I mentioned here today, I gotta say the thing that I'm most excited about, it's a toss up. The idea of the narrative system is a really, really important one for me, as well as the book series that unifies all the stories together. I want both of those things to come into Age of Sigmar desperately, but I would love to know what you think. What do you think? Leave in the comments down below. Tell me what stuff from their 40k previews, you know, even though we haven't seen it yet and how well balanced it is and written, I understand all that, but tell me, like, you know, if someone's going to give you the elevator pitch, right, which is what these really are, of just like throwing a few ideas out there to get you excited, what makes you the most excited? What would you like to see brought over to AOS? Leave in the comments down below, and I'll chat you next time in my next video. Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed that video. It was made possible by the folks over here to the left. These are my top supporters over here on YouTube and on Patreon that keep this channel going. If you'd like to learn more about how to become a supporter and get some cool things in the process, like exclusive pictures and interactions with me, and get your questions answered here on the channel, go ahead and click any of the links down below or the join button on the community page over on YouTube. Regardless of your choice, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me with this video, and I look forward to seeing you in my next one. Happy wargaming.